We were involved in the Marianas invasion, Saipan, Guam, Tinian. We were involved in the early phases of preparing for Iwo Jima. And then in Saipan, the Marines captured a hangar full of Japanese airplanes, almost intact. Our ship was moved in close. We offloaded all of our active squadron, and we ferried aboard all of the captured Japanese planes, and we were sent back flank speed, which was about 17 knots, as fast as we could go, to Pearl, and then back into San Francisco to get this equipment back for analysis. While we were back, I was replaced. I had served the time on board ship, and I reported to Naval Air Station Alameda, where I ran the aerological supply unit to ship instruments all over the fleet. I had been promoted to first class, and I was a shop boss of a location there, and was there when the war ended.
Very good. That leads me into the next question. When the war ended, and the U.S. forces and Allied forces were eventually victorious, do you remember VJ Day?
Absolutely, and VE Day. I was back in port by then. No, I always claim that sailor kissing the girl whose picture you see in every war ending, that it was me. However, the picture was taken in New York, and I was downtown San Francisco.
And after the war, how did you end up in Riverside?
Well, as I said, I had 1 year of civil engineering education, and the most fantastic thing they gave the returning troops was the GI Bill. Most of us, or most that I knew, immediately took advantage of it. I went back to the same university, re-enrolled, and completed in 1948. Was offered a good job with the Phillips Petroleum Company in Oklahoma. And just about that time, a Navy Civil Engineer Corps recruiting team came aboard wearing those good-looking blue and gold uniforms. And I was interviewed, and they said, we have a few openings, permanent regular Navy, for about 50 ensigns and about 10 lieutenants junior grade. And I said, I believe I'll apply for junior grade. Well, you have to have 3 years professional experience. Well, I think I have that. So I signed up. And then the program delayed a little, and I went off to work with Phillips up in Oklahoma. Then I got a call and said, if you're still interested, we have reactivated the program. And I went up to Denver, took the exams, and back to work. And a month or two later, I got a call and said, would you be interested in accepting a commission as an ensign? And I said, no, I think I'm probably a year or two older than most of the ensigns, but I have an application in for JG. Thanks for calling. The next day they called and said, congratulations, you were JG. They now call that O2 level job. And that saved me a lot of promotion advantages for the next 25 years. I finished out my 30 years as a Navy Civil Engineer Corps officer. Overseas duties, mostly with the Navy Seabees. I was in Korea with an amphibious battalion. Our job primarily there was putting MacArthur ashore in Incheon in those 32-foot tides, which no one thought would ever be attempted on amphibious landing in Incheon. I was involved in a little detachment of the east coast of Korea, where we were losing a lot of aircraft coming back from strikes in North Vietnam, running out of fuel, being damaged, and not making it back to their carriers. They were being ditched, many of them in the ocean. So there was a little island just offshore from Wonsan called Yodo Island. The communists had taken over Wonsan, but we kept that little island of Yodo with a Marine detachment on it, just 3 or 4 miles offshore. So our skipper went up and volunteered to MacArthur's people. He says, we can build an airfield on that little strip and serve as emergency landing. So they said, make it happen. So my boss says, Sturnman, get up there and build that thing. We loaded 2 LSTs with Marston Manning and bulldozers and all the equipment we needed and sailed up beyond the DMV and landed up there and had that thing built, as I recall, in about less than 4 weeks. And actually, before it was completely finished, we had saved a squadron of F-4Us on their way back to their carrier that were out of fuel. Related to that, many, many years later, Oliver North was doing a story on the Navy Seabees. And they were looking for a Navy CEC officer who'd been in Korea, and there weren't too many of us. So I got a call, asked if I would come back for an interview, and I did, and that was a delightful meeting with Oliver North. I have greatly admired him all of his military career. And told basically the story of what they call Operation Crippled Chick, where we were saving the little airplanes and that would have been lost if we didn't have an emergency landing for them.
You returned back, obviously, to Riverside, eventually came to Riverside as your full-time residence, and you had a pretty elevated executive position in our city government here. And if you'd tell us a little bit about that experience and whether or not you knew about Camp Anza due to that experience.
Well, how I got to Riverside was I retired from China Lake Naval Weapons Center, my final tour of duty, and applied for a number of jobs. I decided to stay in local government. It was the kind of work that I was accustomed to, engineering, public works, and was first assigned to Fresno County, Deputy Director of Public Works. Then the city of Riverside, I got to be a department head. I was hired by Bill Cornett, then city manager, and told that I would be in charge of the city's streets and buildings and vehicles, communications, trash hauling, garbage hauling, all the good things. And so I moved here and met my wife-to-be. I had been single for about 5 years, and we bought a home in Riverside. But when I first heard recently about Camp Anza, I had heard the name before, but I was surprised that in my responsibilities of all city properties and flood maintenance and vehicle maintenance and street maintenance, I never really knew where it was. My experience with Officers Club when I was an enlisted sailor was kind of like what was the World War II enlisted stories in Europe in the foxholes. I was kind of like one of those guys who I didn't know a whole lot about officers, but I did know that the pretty girls all went to the Officers Club. So where we had a chance, we'd try to sneak over and peek in the windows. That was my closest connection with that as an Officers Club.
Actually, that's interesting. So the officers didn't live in the Officers Club, right? It was just a club for them to hang out, relax?
That was one of our favorite forms of recreation after I became an officer. It was our country club. It was our entertainment place. It was used by everybody constantly. I'm very disappointed that that whole era is kind of phasing out and they're not being used. Many of them are being closed. Many are being merged with the sergeants' clubs. It's a disappointment to me, but that's the way it goes.
The Officer Club, not only was it the locus, the focus, like Bill said, social activities, dances, daily meals, it was mandatory. You had to be a member of the club. You couldn't be on the installation without being a club member. At least that's what it was in the Army.
And you were expected to be there. When the commander called a party, you were there. Some of the best pictures of the Navy are the Pearl Harbor stories of the World War II Officers Club on Pearl Harbor, where they were all attending the night before the attack. And it was a good example of the way the Navy's officers clubs operated. I think I had a great advantage over all of the other young officers by having had 3 years experience, following orders and giving orders, working my way up through the chain. And many of the young ensigns and JGs knew nothing about leading military troops. And I had an advantage that helped me move forward in my promotions. But we enlisted had clubs too. But as I said, it seemed that all the pretty girls were over in the officers club. That was something we missed. One of the most interesting jobs I had was when I had my battalion. I became a CB battalion commander as a commander, but in the Navy, custom is I was called captain. I liked that. And as one of my buddies who was skipper of another battalion said when we both got promoted to captain, he says, Bill, we're just a captain now. We used to be the captain. But in Okinawa, my job there was direct support of the Afloat Marine Alert Battalion. They were on orders to be able to move out in hours' notices. I had to have my 1,000-man battalion and all of our equipment ready to follow them within 2 or 3 or 4 days. We had ships available. We had special tinker-toy equipment, we called it, little bulldozers, little trucks, little tractors that we could airlift and follow the Marines. And at that time, it was primarily Southeast Asia. We had, I had a detachment of my battalion in Vietnam and in Thailand, but we didn't talk about it. We weren't really supposed to be there, and they were specialists. And that was my connection with the Marines. We cooperated, we worked well, and had no real problem. I greatly admire the Marine troops I've known.
I think that does beg another question too, and that is the actual operational relationship that the Marines are, I trust they still are, part of the Department of the Navy. Though autonomous in their own leadership, they are part of the U.S. Navy.
That's correct. As a matter of fact, as you may know, all Marine doctors are naval doctors. All Marine aviators are naval aviators. There's some movement among the Marines to try to get a little more separatism, but I don't think it'll happen.
I just on this documentary called Carrier that came out a few years ago, the Navy people on the aircraft carrier kept making fun of the Marine people because their planes were leaking all over the place and they were falling apart and they didn't know how to take care of them the same way the Navy.
Yeah. Of course, the Marines' main comment to the Navy is, we'll call you when we need a ride somewhere. Just make sure you're available. But
Very good. There's a collegial but sometimes very vocal jousting among all the services, and I think that's portrayed in movies, and I'm sure you lived it as well too. Army to Marine, Air Force to Navy, Navy to Marines, Navy to Army. My family's, my wife's side are all Navy, so they constantly try to rib me, but I say the same thing. I hope you're there when we need some indirect fire or a ride. Otherwise, we'll call you.
I was putting along in a helicopter going from Chulai up to Da Nang when we saw the USS New Jersey offshore out there. We'd heard she was coming, and the ship was firing over our heads into Target's inlet, and we could hear those monster shells whooshing overhead. The chopper pilot got down pretty close to the treetops. That was the first combat action I had seen of the battleship since World War II.